When we try to devise new social forms, we should be very familiar with or aware of the importance of the nation-state form with which we're most familiar. Because the nation-state form is incredibly successful. It's a form of community that combines territory, political community, interest, symbolic or imagined community, and it's been dominant in our world for so long, and certainly within our lifetimes, that it's very hard for us to think outside that way of imagining how a community currency might work. Indeed, the Lime mimics this model so closely that it is almost indistinguishable from it. And of course, many people in the community currency business are very keen to put more distance between the forms of money that they devise, the forms of association they are inventing, and the ones with which we're most familiar. And that leads often to quite sectarian struggles over the definition of the relationship between the currency and the national currency, whether it should be multiple issuer, member subscription supplied or supplied from a central fund, whether it should take the form of hours or some kind of currency, whether it should take a script form or be entirely virtual, and so on. And these things often become a matter of intense debate, leading to a kind of sectarian struggle in the movement, which is comparable only, in my experience, with that of Trotskyist movements or the early Christians or the Puritans. People who were willing to break up an organization on a matter of principle. And as we learned in the last session, the problem is less how can new community currency organizations generate themselves on a standalone basis, but how can they be coordinated as part of a wider movement and integrated more effectively into commerce more generally. I'm sure that some of the speakers will be addressing that question. My final point, though, has to do with the tenacity of old social forms in our own consciousness. It's one thing to come up with a brilliant new scheme. It's another thing to persuade people to sign up for it. And the role of persuasion, of rhetoric, of advertising, of selling, of getting the idea across, getting people to buy into it, is of immense importance. And it seems to me, looking at the field as a whole, that the practitioners are much more concerned usually with designing a new form of association than with working out how to induce other people to buy into it. And I would only say, that the people who devised the economic models that we have internalized and lived by were intensely aware of this need for persuasion. Adam Smith, who is widely credited with having invented modern market economics, taught rhetoric for 15 years before he ever wrote a book on political economy. And he made sure that these lecture notes on rhetoric were burned after his death, so that people would not see how much the wealth of nations was constructed along the lines that his rhetoric lectures suggested. Keynes, the other greatest British economist, published a series of essays in 1931 called Essays in Persuasion. And it was less about coming up with new ways of solving the problem of the collapse of the market economy, as with persuading people to abandon old recipes that they had internalized for generations. His message essentially was spend, don't save. Spend, don't save. There's nothing sophisticated about this message, but he couldn't get people to accept it because they had grown up in a Victorian era in which British economic greatness was essentially guaranteed by saving, contributing to capital funds, and so on. So, I've been a close associate and friend of Michael Linton for many years. He's had a few successes and many failures. And the Let's organization scheme and other community currencies continue always they thrive, they develop, I mean, I'm involved in several myself. I'm trying to get a green currency going in Japan and Thailand. Hope never fails in these areas. But I believe that the principles of community currencies, which you will hear more about now, are unassailable in terms of their superior rationality, human potential, and so on. The main trick, it seems to me, is to overcome the resistance that many people have to abandoning the ideas that they've been forced to live by all their lives.
The lime has ended up being far more work to put together than I expected when I started this project.
Go in front.
Should I go in the front and talk backwards? We have definitely not attempted to go too far with the lime. The current special edition has just been a cash replacement that has allowed us to build up a kind of familiarity with the local businesses and to give people a taste of how, the possibility of using a different kind of currency. We have found that we've had a lot to learn from this. We've discovered designing your script actually has a few little tricks to it. Note design is interesting, but then we've also built up really good connections with businesses in the area. This is what we've really come up with. We now have to go along to these guys in the area and they all know us. We've built the community instantaneously. It's happened with real money. We've had to go along, we got all these guys to accept it because it said there is a pound for pound backing to this money. But we've discovered the most important thing, I think, perhaps. If you own the currency, you don't have to pay. And that really is our real benefit.